All right, in this case study, we're going to do some of the same techniques, a few additional ones, but it's going to be a bit backwards. So my goal is to start with this orb in the sky and to add sort of lightning effects, as you can see here in the final example. And you can see that the lightning is really painterly and loose. And I also want to keep these on their own layer so I can modify them later. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is start with shape. And if you remember in the last video and in previous examples, shape has been made with the flat or round brushes because they were easy to control. Well, in this case, I want the edge to be sort of dynamic. I want it to be like a lightning bolt, which is sort of random and unpredictable. So you can see I've chosen the bristle brush because it has that nice hairy broken edge to it. Now I am using a couple different layers here. You can see them sort of building up as I work through this. And that's because I want to have a controlled way to make these. And I'm achieving that by using a bristle brush for the brush and then a hard eraser. So I'll add a little and then carve some away. And then make a new temp layer, add a little, carve some away. Now eventually I reach my final shape. And when I'm happy with that, I'll just merge those layers down into a single shape layer and then move on to the next lightning bolt. And really I'm just going to repeat the same process. So I'm not worrying about the color, I'm just worrying about the shape. And in all these examples so far, I haven't really explained why it's always good to have these things isolated on their own layers. Now, in a few seconds, what I'm going to do is add a layer style to the lightning. I want it to have sort of a purple bluish glow around the edge. Now, layer styles really only work if you have a nice edge. If I had just painted this right in the background, I couldn't use a layer style. So that's just one example, but there are a lot of reasons that Photoshop just works better when you have each element on its own layer, even if it's only temporarily. So once I get the shape of these 3 lightning bolts to a place where I like them, I'm gonna go ahead and add that effect. And of course, there are tons of other ways to achieve this look, but I've decided that since I want a pretty uniform glow around the entire outside edge, a layer style is actually the easiest way to achieve that. Another approach might be to actually paint with an airbrush on a lower layer, but this is just kind of a 2-click solution. So I'll tweak a few settings here, lower the opacity, and then once I confirm it, I've got a nice sort of lightning look. All right, this is looking pretty good. So now I've finished step 1, which is shape. Now I will lock the transparent pixels, just like we've done a bunch of times, and it's time to think about the color. So the edges are locked in place. I don't have to worry about messing up that shape. Now I can choose different brushes to do the inside rendering. Now in the past, I had a sharp edge and big visible brush marks on the inside of the form. Well, here we're sort of doing the opposite. I wanted to have big dynamic brush marks for the shape, but I actually want sort of smooth rendering inside the form. So here I'm using the more basic brushes to do my rendering. And you can see how powerful this is. The fact that I could lock in those really painterly edges means that I can render and have smooth transitions inside this lightning bolt and don't even have to worry about messing up the edge. It's pretty abstract when you compare it to painting with oils, but if Photoshop allows you to work this way, you might as well. So as I paint here, you notice I'm not opening up the color picker very much. A lot of what I'm doing is on-screen color picking. So I'm using the Alt key to select colors that are already in my canvas. Now, sure, sometimes I'll need to manually open up the color selector and choose one that I have not been using. But once you get this far into a painting, generally the color you want is already somewhere on your canvas. So with that first one sort of used as a guide, I'm going to quickly paint in these other 2 lightning bolts here, but the process is exactly the same. In fact, another cool side effect of this technique is that I can zoom way out like you see here, and I don't have to worry about losing detail because of it. Since all those edges are controlled, these smooth transitions I can see from pretty far away, so I don't really need to stay so tightly zoomed into my document. Now, when we take a look at the final product here, you'll notice that behind these lightning bolts, there's sort of a soft, light glow. That is a good opportunity to use the airbrush. And since these are all on their own layers, this is actually going to be pretty easy. So I'm going to make a new layer here below the lightning bolts. And I'm choosing the airbrush to do the painting because I don't really want this to look like visible brush strokes. I just want to sort of illuminate the clouds behind it. So I'm painting with the very softest brush, and then I'm actually going to use a more broken edge for my erasing. So here's how I get that shape. I have a smooth transition from the painting, and then a rough painterly edge, which is created by the eraser. And since I made this on its own layer, I'm just going to duplicate these because I can modify them a little bit later, but that's going to pretty much work for all my different lightning bolt hits. So there's really no point in painting it a bunch of different times if I can just move it around the canvas. So you'll see I'm cloning copies of the layer using free transform and just sort of reshaping it enough to fit in place. Some artists might consider this cheating, but if you gotta meet deadlines, cheating is fine. All right, now looking again at the final example, you'll see that there are some other smaller lightning bolts. Well, I don't really want to paint more lightning bolts, so I want to duplicate what I've already got. Now, I do have to make one change first, which is the current lightning bolts have a layer style. And since I don't need to modify that anymore, I'm going to go ahead and merge that all down into a single layer that does not have a layer style. And now that it's just one layer, I can copy part of it, paste it into another layer, and I've got another lightning bolt. But as you can see, the lightning bolts are too big, and I don't necessarily want them all to look identical. So this is a great opportunity for an empty layer mask. So here I can use the mask to hide away some parts of the lightning bolt, and in doing so, make it look a little different than the others. Then I'll make another copy of that lightning bolt, and modify that mask to reveal some of the lightning bolt. So you can see how using this mask is great because it doesn't actually delete anything. It just allows me to hide and reveal and do it all with the paintbrush tool. And then to pop this one out a little bit from the background, I'm going to do one more glowing fog layer. So I'll make a new layer, select the airbrush, and paint in that nice glowing fog. And here I'm worrying about sort of smooth transitions, not so much about my edge. And then I'll go ahead and use a bumpy brush to erase away that edge of the mountain. So here you get that nice combination of smooth and rough. And referring back to our final goal here, the one last thing we need to do is add a little bit of lighting information on top of this sphere, just to sort of integrate the lightning bolts and the object that they're connecting with. And if you're waiting for clipping mask layers to come up, here they are. This sort of overlay is a great opportunity for clipping masks. So I'll make a new layer and convert that layer into a clipping mask. Now anything I paint on this layer will not go outside of the boundaries of that sphere. But I'm also not going to mess up the painting that's on the sphere layer. So this is sort of a separate overlay layer. And to do this, I'm using the small strokes brush to give sort of a broken surface, and then I'm erasing away with the airbrush. And I'll do that on all those 3 lightning bolt hits. Adding paint with small strokes, and then erasing a little bit away using the airbrush eraser. And once again, the beauty of this being a clipping mask is that I don't have to worry about messing up the careful rendering that was already on that sphere. So now if I want to make these a little more illuminated, I can make another clipping mask and repeat the exact same process. So now this is the second clipping mask, and it's important to know that this also uses the sphere as its shape guide. So no matter how many clipping masks you stack up, they'll all point down to one guide layer. And in this case, the guide is the sphere. So once again, I'm painting with small strokes and erasing with the airbrush. And that's about it. I'm pretty satisfied to call this finished. So in order to keep this document a little more usable, I'm actually going to do some cleanup work now. So as you'll see in the PSD included in the resources folder, I've simplified this down into only a few layers, the ones I really need to keep separate. Because one thing that's for sure about this process is that you do end up with a bunch of layers if you're not careful. And in a lot of cases, you don't need all those layers for a finished product. So as you work with this technique more, you'll figure out the right balance on how many layers you need when an image is finished. So I encourage you to give this a try. You've got all the brushes as well as the PSDs to try and reproduce this exact result. These are the kind of techniques that just seem to make more sense when you really try them out for yourself.